let's get started. So you're all very welcome to this second Building Literacy Equality webinar. And, you know, anybody who was here a fortnight ago will remember that the idea behind this is really for us to take a little space for ourselves to reflect on our practice and hopefully to share and to gather some useful ideas and, you know, to prompt the little grey cells to fire up or to re-energize, if you like. And I think it's clear from last week's from the fortnight ago, your feedback that people are finding it increasingly challenges to find these kind of spaces. But it's clear that from your feedback that you consider these kind of spaces to be valuable and hopefully energizing, if you like, in times when, you know, energies can be quite low given our circumstances. So in the last webinar, Maggie Feeley spoke of her research and her ideas about learning care, and Helen Ryan gave us an overview of the policy work that NALA has been doing to advance literacy equality across the land. And today I'm delighted to welcome two more literacy activists, Gwen Redmond, the ALO in the Adult Literacy Organiser in Crumlin Adult Education Service, CDETB, and also the Nuala Carter from Coolock Darndale Adult Education Centre, CDETB. And they're going to begin with some reflections on Maggie's work and what she spoke about last week. And we'll then, I think, really try and ground Maggie's ideas in their experience and talk with us about learning care in practice, if you like, especially during these COVID days. So the format today, you'll see, is slightly different in that we're just going to have a panel discussion. So we're going to see how that works. I think also today I'm going to try a little bit harder than I did last time because we ran over a little bit to hold the last 20 minutes, because we would really, really welcome, you know, your sharing of your ideas, your comments, because the whole idea of this is to be more of a collaborative space. So let's see what we can do with the last 20 minutes of the session. So I'm going to hand over to Gwen, and Gwen, just maybe if you were thinking about your, you know, what you heard Maggie Feeley talking about with us and her ideas about learning care, how did her presentation a fortnight ago resonate with your experience?
Thanks, Anne. Yeah, I suppose the notion of learning care, anyone working in the field of adult literacy or adult education will be very familiar with that concept. But what we don't see is that being a visible concept. So it's definitely something we do every day. And what's really interesting about what I was talking about and how we're seeing it in the Literacy for Life piece of work and how we're seeing it now in this notion of building literacy equality is that this notion of learning care is going to be recognised, we hope. So I have a personal interest in this. I had done a lot of reading some time back, and my understanding of what learning care is and what Maggie was talking about, Martha Nussbaum. And if anybody hasn't read her book, Creating Capabilities, I really recommend it because it's a very hopeful piece of work. But essentially, Martha Nussbaum's work was based on the economist Amartya Sen's work, if anybody knows about him. And he did a little bit of work in the state in Kerala in India, because they have very high literacy rates. So their literacy rate is about 96%, I think. Yeah. So he asked why is there a state in India that has such a high literacy rate? And he had a look at, and you know, when states measure things, they measure sometimes things in the notion of GDP or things like that. So what Amartya did was he said, let's look at the state and see what they're doing, but let's take in human indicators. So he started to say, what's happening on the ground in families? What's happening on the ground in care work? What kind of access do people have to education? So that's where the notion of this equality aspect around literacy comes from, and where Martha Nussbaum built her theory around that. So when Maggie was talking about literacy as equality, I was really excited to see this conversation starting to happen, because this learning care work, and we'll talk about it as we go through this, is our everyday work. And yeah, to see it in a strategy and to have it in a 10-year plan is quite exciting.
Great, thanks very much. I really love that idea of human indicators. It's kind of like a counter narrative in a way, isn't it, to some of the measurements we do regularly in our system. So yeah, that's great. Thanks very much, Gwen. And Fionnuala, what can you add to that?
Yeah, I suppose there was an awful lot that resonated throughout Maggie's conversation, and I suppose agreeing with Gwen, the idea of a 10-year strategy for literacy and looking at it from the angle of care and learning care is really exciting. You know, there were a couple of things that came up during the previous session around, you know, meeting people where they're at. And I suppose when we went into lockdown, we've been really good at doing that in the classroom as much as possible, and you know, really just making the service work for students. And the amount of emotional labour that goes into that on the part of tutors is enormous, and it's something that's very difficult to quantify. When we went into lockdown, I suppose my reaction as an adult literacy organiser, I know that our tutors, over and above all the time, they always go way beyond what is expected of them to look after students. And when we went into lockdown, it just made it very stark that the resources and the infrastructure that's available, I suppose we work very well with what we have, but we don't have very much. So my priority was making sure that we had structures and equipment and whatever tutors needed to allow them to continue doing really good work safely with students, and to maximise how many students and maximise their efforts with that in place. Looking at just, we have a couple of figures from our own service, and there's somewhere in or around 20% of students that we couldn't reach at all, and that's really worrying. You know, that's very significant, because I can tell you straight off, it's a number, but I know the faces, and I know that they're the people that need it the most, and we simply had no means of staying in contact with them. I suppose the wonderful thing, looking at the other 80% that we did have contact with, you know, looking at that capabilities approach, the dimensions of inequality, one of the first things that's listed on that is resources. So there are people who have the resources, be that a telephone, be it that they can accept post, whatever it is, that we can keep that conversation, and that not even learning per se, but just keep that contact going. And then I suppose the respect that we hold very dearly within adult literacy anyway for students, and the self-direction that we try to encourage. You know, some people maybe chose to not continue with their learning, but it didn't mean they didn't continue to have contact and didn't continue to have a space that they could come to. So yeah, maybe I'm going off on a tangent here with regard to contact, but yeah.
I can hear how it connects back to, you know, learning care, obviously, you know, and certainly that I suppose what it suggests is also how well staff in adult literacy services know the people they're working with and for, and you know, that idea of just emotional labour and the going way beyond. But I suppose the question that would arise around that is, how long can people go way beyond without, you know, or what would support people, you know, to maintain that level of energy, commitment, all the things that Maggie talked about that are lumped under in some way learning care, the kind of unseen work that takes time, commitment, energy, you know, resources, all of those things. So I suppose that would be a question, you know, that might be interesting to look at in the wider sector as well, wouldn't it? But how long?
Yeah, I think we could see that the same, you know, any literacy service would have been the same during the closure. And I remember it, Maggie mentioned when she was talking, she was quoting from some distance learning piece of research, and she was saying that what mattered was the care in the person's voice when they were contacting them during closure. And we could see that here too, and Fionnuala's alluding to that as well, that even if they didn't continue engagement in learning because that was difficult, they did want to stay a part of their community. So it was really important that they weren't forgotten. That every week we were checking in, you know, and, you know, maybe posting something out, maybe saying, how did you get on with that piece of work? But more than that, that you were still part of this group. And you're right, I think, like, in terms of how do, like, that is invisible work, that care piece. And how do we advocate for resources for that extra energy that has to be expended to support any service that, you know, offers that extra care work. I'll give you an example of ongoing, you know, this is something that struck me last night when I was thinking about this in terms of learning care. Last week we had a teacher, she came into this office and she was wearing her mask, as we all are, and she works with a group that have, and I don't like to talk in levels, but these are a group of students who are very much on the beginning of their journey with literacy learning. So, and some of them don't have English as a first language. So if you can imagine her classroom now with 2 meter distancing and everyone with masks on, and this is usually very much over the shoulder work, you know, it's very peer to peer or teacher to peer, your teacher to learner, it's very much side by side learning. But she walked into the office and she just leaned against the wall and she was exhausted. You know, she said, how long can we do this for? And I thought, what's not going to give here is what the good teaching that the learner receives and the care that the learner receives. But there may be some give. How long can we carry this kind of stuff, extra little bit of care that we have to do during this? So I think it's about making that kind of work visible. I think it's about, when we talk about this 10-year strategy, that Maggie talked about the state, and she talked about the state being all of us. So when there's a 10-year strategy, it's up to all of us to advocate for the implementation of that strategy. It's up to all of us to keep on top of it and keep talking about it and keep the pertinent issues out there. So I think that's all of our responsibilities to do.
Okay. Very good, and it's connected to Maggie's point of we are all part of, you know, we're all part of one another. I think, you know, and that kind of value system that actually has really been one of the core kind of maybe unspoken pieces that's involved in adult literacy work. You know, that importance, the importance of community and connection, and that's been so highlighted during COVID, I suppose, really. And Fionnuala, you were talking about the 20% there that you know, you just could not reach, and so clearly that's you know, a challenging thing for any adult literacy service and probably replicated across the country. And so other challenges during COVID in terms of providing learning care in its best sense. What other challenges do you think, you know, that you've, you know, when you've been thinking about this, what ones came to mind?
Yeah, so I suppose I just looked really at the response that our team had, and I'd love to hear other people's experience throughout this as well, if there's any ideas popping out from the audience there as well. I mean, there were a couple of key things that we did from the outset. I made sure that all of our tutors had mobile phones, which allowed them to, I suppose, maintain healthy boundaries within the whole scenario. We did an awful lot of work on our website, which is mainly made up of student stories, but we created a Learn Here section as well, where tutors could create classes, and rather than having a Moodle or something that you needed passwords, which I think most people's experience with literacy students is that that's difficult. We had a little one-click wonder that they could maybe WhatsApp out a little link, follow up with a phone call. We used a postal service. We email and Zoom where it was appropriate, and we had a lot actually happening, and I'm sure this is reflected around the country as well on WhatsApp. So tutors chunking classes, WhatsApping them out to students, and working that way. Like the initial challenge was, what resources do people have? And individually, within groups, even just where can we meet people, you know? I'll go back to that idea of meeting people where they're at when the landscape has completely changed. What access? Do they have a button phone? Do they have a smartphone? Do they know how to use their smartphone? Do they realise they have Wi-Fi if they can tether? All of these things. I mean, equipment was a huge issue, and I think the digital divide, it's been spoken about a lot in the last 6 months, has just become gapingly obvious. I suppose, and I was thinking about it, it kind of goes back to learning care as well in terms of the primary care aspect. There was some lovely outcomes on the back of it as well. So it happens to be another beginner kind of English language literacy beginner student that I think I might have mentioned to you before, who the tutor was, you know, creating lessons and sending them out on WhatsApp, and this particular student would be reliant on her husband's phone and would never traditionally have had her own phone or means of communication. And just there a couple of weeks ago, so they're back in, the tutor would be diligently just sending stuff out to this student. I'm not really sure if she was getting it, she wasn't getting any feedback, or she might get a one word like a thank you, you know, something like that back. But she really wasn't sure if this student was engaging with that work or not. And then a couple of weeks ago, the student phones her tutor and has received this story about Aisha, who's gone into town, has gotten lost, and she's on, teacher, Aisha's lost. And the tutor was just, this was such a colossal breakthrough, really. And they had a conversation about this piece that the tutor had sent, a little piece of reading with audio with it. And, you know, how you would react if you're lost in town, how would you'd ask somebody to slow down their speaking and for directions. And so it transpires that this lady, and I don't know what the background, whether it was just that her husband was fed up of her using his phone, or or whether the family had been trying to get her to use a phone, who knows, but she now has, for the first time in her life, her own means of communication. And that, what seems like such a small thing to us, is a door to a whole world for her, for learning and for engagement. And there's certainly been some amazing kind of stories, people that I never would have thought. And I think Gwen had similar idea around people suddenly stepping up, and you know, the mother of invention, I suppose, where, you know, if you need a way to be a community, that suddenly digital skills start to improve, and even the idea that you can give it a go becomes okay and becomes necessary, you know. I don't know, that's probably rambled around what you're asking me with it.
It illustrates very well learning care in action. And I suppose when somebody has, you know, critical needs, that they have a way of having those needs met, you know. So it's a fantastic example, I think, Fionnuala. And Gwen, did you want to add some kind of illustration or examples?
Yeah, the same experience. And I think what has happened is, you know, we've been talking for some years, and I'm sure lots of places have, and some have moved faster than others, around becoming more, you know, literacy through digital means. And we've been theoretically in our heads moving towards it. And what this did was, you know, off we go, we had to do it. So it wasn't only for the learners, it was for the tutors and the practice as a whole. We had to become, you know, we've all skills we hadn't got 6 months ago now, which is great. And the other thing that taught me, and myself and a few of the tutors here were having a conversation about the other day, is that level of independence that the learner has, that maybe sometimes, do we hold hands too much a little sometimes? Because we were really surprised at the amount of learners who hadn't got an email address who suddenly had one. You know, who suddenly had a smartphone. So they had obviously saw, you know, there would be conversations with learners previously around, they have the small Nokia phone and they have no need for a smartphone. They tell you that. So what would I use it for? But now they were buying them, or somebody was buying them for them, and they were finding the value in them. So yeah, like we had an art class going on, and the teacher was WhatsApping out the week's work, and one student in particular discovered how to use email, and she was even attaching pictures of her artwork, which was fantastic, and sending it to us all. So yeah, like, you know, it makes us step back and realize if you give people a little more space and give them a reason to find, you know, a reason to use these devices and, you know, online platforms, that if they see a value in them, they'll use them.
For sure, yeah. And I suppose so a lot is about connection and staying connected. And say, for example, now here we are, a new term, a different term. How do you think that work that has been done in the interim has impacted on learners and on the literacy service? That's a new question now that we hadn't prepared.
I think it's made us. We've always been very adaptable, but I think it's just made us all that more flexible. You know, we're, I suppose use the analogy of like we're a small boat rather than a big ship. We adapt to needs on the ground all the time, and that's always been the MO of the literacy services anyway. But I look now at students' power over how they learn. So I'll give you an example. I walked into one of the classrooms the other day, and we had 3 students in the room. Obviously numbers are massively reduced because of the distancing and masks, and you know, some people just aren't comfortable attending. So I had 3 students, the tutor, and this lovely little face up on a shelf on a laptop participating, and she had full view of the whole group and could fully participate. And I just thought, that is amazing. That is just incredible that, you know, if that idea was suggested to any of the team 7 or 8 months ago, they would have thought you were bark raving mad. So, you know, and that's just one example, and I'm sure there are different experiences of it in services all over the country, but you know, there's a lot more control, I think, on the part of the student over how they engage. Okay. And I think there's been such a huge amount of creativity as well, and that has to carry through in lots of other ways as well. There's an openness to changes or to trying out new things that maybe it might have been more difficult before.
That's a very interesting thing, isn't it? That kind of openness to change. You know, that's a big significant thing to have happened. You know, finding new ways and creativity. Have you other examples in terms of creative responses during the pandemic?
Well, I'm just actually thinking of, and I'm not sure which bit sparked it there, but in terms of, go back again to kind of the power that students have, which is really important. And so we would put out a publication every year of student writing, which is up on our website as well, and students can interact with it. And we've been really mindful of putting audio with everything, so that it doesn't matter what literacy level you're at, and you can read along and enjoy and share it around and whatever. And it's a great resource to have, and a lovely showcase for students to enjoy. But during lockdown, there would be students who are very capable but whose literacy is at a very low level. So we now have students who are recording stories on audio and emailing them across, and they can navigate their way around. Their spelling is maybe not where they'd like it to be, but there's no longer an obstacle to them expressing themselves and being published, if that makes sense. And I just thought that was just, I didn't see it coming, and it's just magic to have students able to express themselves to the world, and not have the obstacle of just what we think of as traditional literacy. They're incredibly digitally literate, obviously, in those instances. I suppose it's again back to that creativity and, you know, finding ways.
Sure, and it's very part of the story of student voice as well. You know, really important thing that we talk about so much in adult literacy, and then that, and what that does to how your identity is impacted by such an intervention or such an event in a way. And even though from maybe people outside the literacy world don't really understand how that can be so transformational, you know, and yet we know as literacy practitioners that it is surely transformational, and the beginning of that move from, you know, part of Maggie's research is, you know, that, you know, harmed learning identities to flourishing learning identities, to seeing yourself as someone who has the capacity to learn, and how that can be such a transformation in somebody's life. So, fantastic example of that, the enacting, in a way, of the value system that underpins adult literacy. Gwen, I know that you have some examples there. I could see you were notes to yourself.
I was thinking about what are we taking forward with us, is what I was scribbling a minute ago. Yeah, so one of the things we did in very early in the lockdown, when we all went into this shock mode of what do we do now, and very quickly had to find ways to connect with a learner outside of the classroom. We had a little Facebook page that was only really for, you know, putting notices up or whatever. But I asked the tutors if they'd have any interest in videoing something, you know, a little lesson of any sort, and putting it up. So obviously they were, you know, you're vulnerable when you're videoing yourself and you're not particularly techie and you haven't got the equipment, but they all went for it, and they did some fantastic little videos, which meant, again, like Fionnuala said, I was able to send them out from our database, just the link, and all they had to do was click on it on their phone. So it was easy to see their teacher, it was easy to see the little lessons. But what came out of that was, you know, teachers then started to think about, well, this is actually a repository. I could actually save these pieces of work. So there's one in particular, one of our tutors, Linda, who's a maths tutor, who's actually got her own Edmodo site and her own YouTube channel now. And what she does is she records her lesson, and it can be used in the classroom as a recording if she wants. But if she's teaching in the classroom, she can then direct them when they go home to look at the lesson again. So like we're doing now, you're recording this, Anne, to send it on to whoever afterwards. You know, to record something and have it as for the learner to look at again at home is something we'd never thought about before. So that's something we're definitely going to look forward.
A good example of a very practical thing. Yeah. As you said, we wouldn't have thought of it before, except we're prompted now by this new reality we live in. And are there other things? Because I think that that's really important. You know, this was obviously designed to be a reflective space and that, but I suppose it's taking the time to sit back and think about. I think it's Aaron Datty Roy talks about this. You know, a pandemic being, you know, a rupture in a way, and one that should be an opportunity to stop and reflect on what is it that you want to bring forward, and to imagine what you want to bring forward into the new reality, if you like, the next phase. So looking back over the last month and all the good things and the challenging things and the humanness that underpins it all. If you know, when you're thinking about going forward now, you talked there about creativity, obviously, and the stuff around digital transformation. But in terms of learning care, what are the things that you really want to now hold on to and ensure that in the practice going forward? I mean, it may have been there in the past, but maybe a new light has been shone on it. And so what are those things that you want to really ensure are in your bag going forward, if you like, for the next phase? Who'd like to go first? I
suppose it's sparking a few thoughts there around I suppose a more blended approach in some instances. So I know with some of our ITABI programs where there's a requirement for 6 hours a week, and where we can't have students in for more than 2 hours at a time, a couple of our ITABI programs now have turned into 2-hour sessions and then remote learning. And that's actually an unforeseen result of that, is that the self-direction and the digital skills are increasing much more than they would just in the classroom. because no more than Gwen was talking about the student having the time to have that flipped classroom approach and not have somebody over their shoulder all the time, but to have that space to come back into to do the checking. That's working really well, and I could see that continuing potentially into the future in those kind of scenarios. I suppose I'd come back again to what I mentioned at the outset around infrastructure and resources. Space can be a massive issue for an awful lot of literacy services all over the country, and that's just wrong. We shouldn't have to worry about a roof over our heads in servicing a community around us, and I think that is something that definitely needs to be a nationwide response needs to happen, that we have space. In terms of skill levels, I know we've been doing a lot more CPD. We obviously have very professional staff, but we've been doing a lot of peer-to-peer learning amongst the staff, and that's been working really well, and is something that we've kind of found a better space to do that, because we're all remote and we're all able to zoom in now, whereas previously you would have your heart broken trying to get tutors into the same room because their timetables are so disparate. So that's working really well, and we'll definitely be bringing that forward. I think the staff have been able to have much more involvement, and I don't know what Gwen's experience is of this in the day-to-day running proper of the service. There's been an increase in effective communication, I suppose, for want of a warmer term on it. We're chatting more, I suppose. We have space to talk more and to coordinate more, ironically, at a distance. And that goes back to that takes time, you know, and that fits into, you know, a caring infrastructure. And then obviously equipment, we need to be able to resource our students to engage in whatever way they need to, as well as tutors. I could continue.
We left waiting for a minute and then
look, I'll echo what Fionnuala says. I mean, for me, it's you know, resources are an issue, they always are, and like for me, for things that have made a difference, like yes, being at a distance digitally has allowed me personally to, and I don't want to use the word delegate, it sounds wrong, but share the practice, share the load. Where you tend, sometimes as an ALO, all ALOs will know this, you're a very busy person and you tend not to have time to think to ask somebody else to help out. The offers of help are always there, but you find it very hard to pick them up. But I found that easier to do recently. I'm very happy now to allow people to run with things and step back a little bit. So independence of the learner has come across, you know, but also maybe, yeah, allowing the service to run. We know we run a good service, allow it to run, but I would like to see definitely more resource. You know, the teachers are paid for teaching, but they do a lot more. So I would like to see that resourced. And just to say that I am very hopeful right now, because you know, under Simon Harris's brief now, I'm impressed so far. I have seen him say that, you know, he mentioned, you know, he spoke to him about the digital divide. He went off and did something. We have laptops now that have come as a result of that conversation sitting in the room here. So that is very speedy, I think. So I'm impressed by that. If things go that way going forward, you know, I think there's lots of space for growth in this area and to ask for things and to advocate for things. So yeah, I just think we keep this conversation going and highlight the needs of the services.
Good, great, and it's really nice to end in a space that's hopeful. So thank you both very much for sharing your experience with us. I found it really interesting, but I'm actually going to ask people, if you haven't used the this platform before, so if you would like to ask a question, you'll see there's a little sign there that's a little hand, and if you want to click on that hand, I can open the mic for you, and you can let us know what you're thinking, and If there's any comments you want to make or observations or questions you want to ask of either Gwen or Fionnuala, we'd be happy with that also. And if you feel that you don't want to take that step, that's fine too, although we would love it if you would. You can type in questions if you feel like you're just not in the place to have the mic open for yourself. So over to you guys out there. Damien, I think you've actually clicked on, so you're very welcome. I'm going to unmute you now, and we'll take your question, and hopefully the connection will be good. So over to you, Damien. Oops. There might be a difficulty with the connection there. Hello, Damien. I feel like I'm the Eurovision host here. Calling Damien? No, Damien, I don't think your sound is coming through there. So maybe if you would like to put your question in the questions box, that would be another way of, because your hand is definitely up and I have unmuted you, so. No, okay. Anybody else there want to make a comment? Ella, I think you're ready to go. Now, Ella. Hello, Ella, you're welcome. No.
Hi, lady, sorry, I just wanted to say thanks very much for listening to me today. It was very insightful. I do agree with what one of the ladies said about, I think it would be nice, yeah, we do as tutors do a lot more than is probably recognised, I suppose. I did put a comment in there and said I like the idea. One of the ladies spoke about saying that her tutors had access to a mobile phone. And I would be conscious of, you know, and we had to do it ourselves where, you know, we were asked to send things out in the post. And if you're dealing with literacy students of a very low level, you know, sending something in the post isn't really the appropriate way to contact them. And I would have liked the idea that ye had of the tutors having access to a mobile phone, a work phone, you know, to contact students. It would have been a lot more reassuring to hear the voice that they were used to, rather than somebody else from administration side of things phoning somebody that they're not working with. So I would like to see more resources coming down the track for us as tutors. I think we in Tipperary ETB, some of us were very lucky. We there a couple of years ago we got the use of Surface Pro, which we have for our work, and it's a fabulous resource for us to have, to be able to use it and to do our Zoom classes or Teams calls or whatever. But going forward, and especially with the times we're in, I do think we need to be thinking more about resources for the tutors to make life easier, and so that we are the ones that can stay in contact with our students. I know, sorry, I also wrote in the comments there and I said, you know, we sent out cards to some of our students. And I know for me personally, I would have met some of the families of those students, you know, when I was out doing a bit of shopping or whatever. And the joy that that card brought to some of those learners, like everybody that came and visited, that particular student leapt up and showed the person the card that they got from their teacher. And it meant the world to them. But I would be slow myself to send stuff in the post to the lower level literacies.
Okay. Okay, Gwen or Fionnuala, did you want to respond to that, or?
Ella, I'm sorry now, it's just I missed a little bit of sound in there. Ella said that she had been provided with some resource, but I couldn't hear what it was in Tipperary.
We have a Surface Pro.
Oh, okay, right.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, look, it's just another indicator, isn't it, that people want to remain part of a community. That's what that says, and not to be forgotten about.
Yeah. Okay, Ella, thank you very much for breaking the silence there. That was very kind of you. And Good luck with your work. Thank you. And just see, there's a few questions here. So what does chunking a class mean? The question from briefly.
I'm guessing this is talking about chunking classes onto WhatsApp. So it's actually a great way to deliver a class. So for example, if you're doing a piece on, I'll take an example from our history hub and the Great Whisky Fire in Dublin. So the first message might be, watch this video, and it'll be somebody talking about the Great Whisky Fire. The next message will be, read this piece, and maybe a link to a piece of text that they can read. Then the fourth part might be, now think about what you've read, what were the sources used, what's your response to it, and that's a piece of work that needs to be sent back to the tutor. And then there might be finally, do you know about the museum website? Go and visit it, and a link through to it. So that's an example. Or you could chunk in terms of lesson aims. So again, depending on what work you're doing, there might be a bit of reading, there might be a bit of writing, a bit of listening, a bit of speaking. And audio recording works as well really well on WhatsApp. So it's very flexible. I hope that answers that.
I think it does, yeah. And there's a couple of comments here. I think that this is an interesting one. We've talked a lot about, and we have referred to this a little bit, in the adult literacy service, it's always, the learner-centered learning needs, but we're also talking about the tutors, And so in terms of care of tutors, what was put in place and what might need to go forward in terms of supporting their work, because clearly without that tutor cohort experience and care themselves, if you like, we're going to have a whole chunk gone, and the learning needs of learners will never be met. So in terms of that, what sort of things you want to carry forward?
I'll just go back to that. That was what was in my head when I thought about that tutor who came into the room quite tired and exhausted after class, because that day I was extremely busy as well. So she in one sentence said, oh my God, this is so tough. And I in one sentence said, oh, I hear you. God, this is all so tough. And we went off about our ways. But reflecting on that, it's up to me as well to provide a space where that can be just trashed out and just talked about a little bit, because very often you can do this care work, but you need an acknowledgement for it. I think you need just to be able to say, hey, this is tough and I'm doing a good job, and you need someone to tell you are doing a great job. So for me, what I need to do now is start scheduling these Zoom, online meetings. Like Fionnuala said, it's hard to meet your tutors. You often meet them on a corridor, or you often meet them just before or after a class. But this has provided a new opportunity where you can get together for 20 minutes and just say how everything's going. So definitely that's something we'll be implementing here.
Okay, very good. Fionnuala, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, look, I suppose I can just echo what Gwen is saying about tutors, and again back to my first reaction when lockdown hit, that we know that tutors go over and above all the time. We have an amazing team of tutors, and really professional and incredibly caring for their students. But that work needs to be properly valued, and it needs to be given that space that I hope we're starting to create, but it needs to be better resourced, and maybe given a bit more structure. Because once tutors have the space and the capacity to roll, everything else follows. I'd have no worries about students after that.
Yeah, great. Because it's interesting, isn't it, that sometimes in our commitment to learner-centeredness, that the key piece around tutors can just get slightly moved to the side. So good to keep that in focus, I think. Okay, I think we're going to wrap it up there, and there are lots of very interesting compliments, really, in terms of comments from people, and just how interesting the conversation has been, and stimulating. So, and with that in mind, I think just before we finish, I'll just say to people that, I think that we have a real opportunity. Gwen reminded us there at the moment to, if you like, have our voices heard, have your voices heard. And Solis, as you know, are going to be doing a consultation. So keep an eye out for that around what should be included in the 10-year strategy. And, I'm sure that there will be opportunities for individuals and groups to put their best thinking forward. And there's certainly lots of great experience and thinking out there, and really take the opportunity, I think, find the time, if you can, to actually record some of your thinking and see how it can be amplified into the new strategy. So, and also just to remind people before we leave here that there is both Gwen and Fionnuala have provided links for, there's a Facebook page that Gwen, that you set up, is that right?
Yeah, just if they want to look at the little videos that tutors put up during lockdown. Yeah.
Okay, so I have the link for that on the handout. You'll see that on your screen there. Just download that. And Fionnuala, you have a link also to your website.
So our coolockals.ie, which it's lovely.
Great. Okay, so thanks very much. Thanks very much for that. So be sure and take the time to have a look at those. I think they're very hopeful and creative responses. And also just to remind you that at the end of this, there'll be an evaluation that will pop up. And there were some great ideas last week or a fortnight ago from you around future webinars, and we're going to be taking all of those. And I don't have a flag for the next one, but I will be letting you know. So thank you very much, everybody, and stay safe. Thanks.
And before we go, just I know that this was a response to the family learning conversation that you did work on, and that kind of looking for a space to reflect. And I think going into this, I was thinking, God, it's so busy at the moment, but actually the last couple of weeks, myself and Gwen have kind of been chatting over and back. It's actually been incredible to have a focus, a reflection, and it's been really, really, it's been a really happy thing to be doing at the start of term, when usually we're busy doing other stuff and not reflecting, just getting on with it. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, so thanks very much, everybody, and go and do some thinking, and as I said, stay safe. Bye-bye. Bye. Thanks, Gwen. Thanks, Fionnuala.